On this episode of the Innovative Schools podcast, we're talking with Jessica Sinarski about how movement in the classroom can help minimize disruptive behavior and improve learning. Jessica also explains the $10 word proprioception. So come on, let's learn together. Hey everybody, this is Jordan, and I am joined today by co-host Liz for today's Innovative School podcast. Hey Liz.
Hey Jordan, how's it going?
It's going good. We're just hanging out, doing some more podcasts. Who's our guest today?
So today we have one of the most incredible women that we could have had, Jessica Sinarski. She is an absolute godsend and a powerhouse when it comes to education and counseling. So I'm super excited to learn from her today.
Hey Jessica.
Hey, I am super glad to be here. Thanks for that, Liz.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Wonderfully said. Jessica, I'm excited to do this podcast with you. I've known you for a little bit. We've done a couple different things together. And so I'm really interested to get into this topic of movement and proprioception. But first, can you tell us a little bit about your work in education and with students and kind of why you got into the work that you do?
Absolutely. So my background is actually in mental health. That's what I went to grad school for, and my career has always been with kids who have really big behavioral stuff going on. Sometimes that's the acting out kinds of behaviors, sometimes it's the shut down kinds of behaviors, but a good chunk of my career was dealing with the aftermath of trauma, so foster care, adoption, kinship care kinds of situations. And then what started to emerge as I understood the brain behavior connection more is that there are just ways to function as caring adults that are helpful for all kids and like really essential for kids who've experienced trauma or for some of our neurodivergent kids. And so as more and more of my clients in private practice and in workshops and things like that were having to go try to translate this stuff to the school, it just became clear that there was this gap in what schools were getting in a really user-friendly way. And so I founded the organization Brave Brains to try to bridge that gap.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Jessica. Honestly, that's incredible. So I just want to know from your perspective, what are some things that you've seen along the lines of disruptive behaviors in the classroom surrounding like sensory processing things going on with students?
Sure. So when I mean, disruptive behaviors, I'm sure if you are listening right now, you don't need me to tell you, you have like a list from today probably that you can come up with. So I'm talking about things all the way from, blurting out and sort of impulsively like bothering your neighbor and some of those kinds of things through to some of the big meltdown, aggressive outbursts, those kind of like tantrum sorts of things, fights. All of this can be sort of in the realm of disruptive behavior, as well as those shut down the kid that like hides under the desk or sort of, head down on the desk. What I talk about as a sort of turtle, like going into turtle mode, that disrupts learning. That disrupts not only that student's learning, but the teacher's train of thought and other students. And so my hope in introducing making sensory science a little bit more user-friendly for educators is to just give enough of the basics that there are some like pretty easy preventative things that can help all students. And then, of course, get some support from your team for some of those kids that need a little bit more. And so school counselors and behavior specialists and occupational therapists. And yeah, let's team up to hit the big stuff. But man, we can dial back a lot of the impulsive, fidgety, aggressive kinds of things that just happen on a day-to-day basis and are annoying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I know, just thinking about myself, like in school, when a kid would have some kind of outburst or something that went on, like I was disruptive for the whole rest, at least for a while. And I didn't always understand what's going on. At times I was probably more mean about that, not
Sure.
understanding what was going on. And that probably, impacted me and my learning and my ability to learn. So I really see where being able to understand, this sensory processing and how it can really help with the classroom. Do you have we talked a little bit about it, but I want to dig in a little bit more of like your personal experiences
Yeah.
with sensory processing and seeing how it's disruptive to learning in the classroom.
Yeah. So the like understanding the sensory behavior connection got very personal about 12 years ago as I
Mm.
was learning some of this science on the professional side and seeing what my clients needed that my training had not provided. I also was dealing with it on the home front. I am a mom of 3 boys, and
Wow.
one of my boys was having just a whole host of behavioral things going on that we didn't really understand. He had a super sweet disposition. He was very bright. He is still very bright, but he was a very bright little dude reading at age 4 and yet he was fidgeting constantly. He was one day the preschool teacher had asked us in to talk because she's like, I don't know what's going on. I asked him to draw a house and he just burst into tears
Mm.
um and so what began to unfold was understanding that the signals between his brain and his body were just not all connecting in the ways that let him feel safe and in control and ready to learn and make
Mm.
connections. And so what unfolded has really informed some of that. Um, this can help kids who really need it, as well as, man, as I've put this in practice with kids everywhere, gosh, everyone just really needs a little bit more of that $10 word that you mentioned, proprioception. That is, and so that's part of what I try to make easy for educators is you don't need a whole nother degree. If you want to go become an occupational therapist, yay, please do. But be a teacher. We need you to teach, and just this little bit of knowing that of knowing what's going on between body and brain can be a game changer for classroom behavior.
Yeah. So, Jessica, you mentioned a word, proprioception. If you could just help our listeners just kind of understand a little bit more of what that is and why it's so critical in the classroom and outside
Yeah.
of the classroom, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've never heard that word before, you are in good company. I was way further into my adulthood and career than I would like to have been. And so proprioception is one of our hidden senses. We have these 5 external facing senses that we all learned about in preschool,
Hmm.
but then we have hidden senses as well. And proprioception comes from our muscles and joints and tendons and is kind of known as the like body awareness sense. So
Okay.
even right now, as you're listening, there's a little bit of pressure maybe from your headphones on your ears, or if you're like sitting in a chair, there's that little bit of like your body is aware that you're sitting in a chair. And when we're like, it can be super disorienting if we're not getting enough of that. And so for our kids who are really struggling and fidgety and agitated, it's kind of like that feeling of when you think there's another stair there and there's not. And
Mm.
you get that
Ooh.
like, oh,
I did
that's
that this morning.
uncomfortable, right? It does not feel good. And so that kind of disoriented feeling
Mm.
is underlying a lot of the irritating behavior that we see.
Wow,
Okay,
that's
so
absolutely incredible.
like listening to you talk about it. So when you first talked when we were talking about getting this podcast and you were using the word proprioception, I did my own research because, as I said earlier, it is a $10 word, and I only had $3 in my bank account, so I was really concerned I couldn't afford it. So I did some just to like understand a little bit more about that because you called it the next sense, right? We know like
Yeah,
taste and sight and smell and
sure.
all that stuff, but proprioception being that next sense that we don't talk about as that much, and just to help
Mhm.
it helped me understand a little bit more what that system does to understand that there's like an automatic side and there's a learned side,
Hmm.
and the automatic side being things like being able to walk over uneven ground without thinking about it. Your muscles and tendons and everything just
Mm.
kind of do what it needs to do to keep you upright, or even just being able to scratch your nose without looking. Like
Mhm.
you can't really see your nose; it's there, but you can reach and you can grab it. Like just that, like you're saying, that sense of awareness, knowing that you're sitting in a chair. And then there's learned proprioception things like more complex, playing the piano or riding a bike, learning sports and things like that. So But what you're kind of talking about here is that system, please correct me if I'm not using the correct terminology, can
Sure, no,
sometimes
you're good.
be seeking kind of more input.
Mm.
It's not quite getting everything, or kind of like what.
Satiated. It's not
Okay,
like,
sure.
yeah.
Mm.
So yes, I love that you're bringing this up. So you mentioned, there's stuff that our body is kind of automatically adjusting to, but the reality is almost everything that we do fairly automatically, like to drink from a cup.
Mm,
I know to grab it at a certain pressure. I know to lift it
mm,
with a certain amount of muscle. I know to pull it to my lips. But we learned that, right? That's actually something that way, way, way back when there had to be all these connections that made that automatic, kind of like riding a bike or driving a car. That took effort at first. So almost everything we do now without thinking took effort at first. And our senses are very involved in that process. So when you think about, well, and I'll say too, I loved your $10, $3 analogy because the bargain version of the word is prope. So when in
okay,
doubt, go prope.
with probe, got it.
Um, I think for a lot of our kids in the modern age, they are craving more prope because they're
Mm,
not out hauling buckets of water distances or
hmm
plowing the field or
Mm.
things that really take a lot of muscle um, and give a lot of feedback to that proprioceptive system. So when you're thinking about prope, I think about like things like pressure, weight, pushing, pulling, crashing, banging. Any of those kinds of things are giving little bursts of information to your muscles and joints, and that goes to your brain. So another way to think about this that has helped me just visualize the science of it is we know we have like taste buds on our tongue.
hmm
So those are sensory receptors. They're like taking the chemical and electrical information from our food and translating it for our brain like, yum ice cream or whatever, like danger, that's rotten, right? Our senses work to keep us safe and they help us enjoy the world. So prope is kind of like that too, where, being able to step on uneven ground or um or know where like even being able to walk down the hall without holding yourself up on the walls,
hmm
like it's using proprioception and another
Mm.
hidden sense that we won't talk about today. So we can think about our sensory systems kind of like a cup, and all of us have different sizes of cups. So my son, his prope cup is very big. He
Okay.
at the time and still needs a lot of proprioception in his life to feel okay. So much so that he, even as a teenager now, he always sleeps with a weighted blanket because he
Mm.
doesn't feel right the next day if he doesn't. So he gets a nice dose of prope at night. If he's stressed out, he still will like sort of wrestle against me or he'll go, um, get some prope in the woods, smacking a tree with a stick or swinging some,
Oh,
random
what boy
something.
behavior, right?
He's not a sporty kid, right? He's not the kid
Yeah.
who's going to be playing football and running track, but his body still needs all that sensory input. And so that's another part of my encouragement to educators is it's not necessarily your most coordinated kids who are craving this. And so sometimes we think we're doing brain breaks that help, but they're supposed to follow these certain instructions, and if they can't, they get frustrated. And then,
Mm.
but those might be the kids that need the movement the most. And so,
Mm.
part of what I've tried to put together in a couple different ways, some free ways, some really low barrier of impact ways is making this easier to understand and put in practice right away. So that's part of why I'm excited you guys brought me on the podcast because I know we're going to spend the whole second half talking about what this looks like in action.
Wow, Jessica, I love that you shared kind of giving that illustration of a cup of proprioception being either sometimes they need a lot, sometimes they need a little. Um, for teachers and people in education in general, what is a way that you can kind of notice and be alerted that, hey, maybe the student needs a little bit more proprioceptive input at the time?
Yeah, great question.
Mm.
So I think of things that like fidgeting, excessive movement, crashing into people or objects. I used to joke that my son was like a bumper car. Like he didn't know where he was unless he was bumping into someone or something. Those kids that struggle to sit still, or if you're seeing a lot of meltdowns, surprisingly, that can be something that, so like crying at the drop of a hat kind of thing, that might be a sign that that sensory system is a little off kilter. Um, Even some of the pesky sort of attention-seeking behavior, like what is often labeled as attention-seeking, that's not
Mm.
my favorite phrase, but those attention-seeking behaviors, I heard a story from a teacher who was trying to put this science in practice in her classroom, and she's like, "Okay, I was so proud of myself because there's this kiddo and he struggles in the afternoon," and I was like, "Oh, I think this is that prope thing." And so when he was starting to get a little fidgety and bothering his neighbor and stuff, I just went up beside him and I just gave him a big squeeze on the side and was like, "Hey, buddy, come on, hang in there." And that
Mhm.
squeeze was that probe. And she's like, "That it worked. Like that did it. Like he was able to regroup and get back on task and not distract his peers and all of those things." And then she said the next day I kicked myself because she's the same thing was happening and she was like, "All right, that's it. You owe me a lap at recess." And it's easy to think that lap at recess is also in a way proprioception, like walking is a little bit of prope,
Mhm.
but it's punitive prope,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah,
we're
I kinda get it. It's so automatic to just walk, to just run, you're just kinda
Yes.
going through it.
Yes. And so instead of him being able to free play and probably get a lot more of the input he's seeking, he was in trouble. And so she was like, "You know what? I'm now realizing I need to just get this into our afternoon.
Mm.
Like just having having more prope in our afternoon is going to help." So whether that's a good side squeeze, or maybe it's a jumping challenge, or like there's all
Mm.
kinds of ways to do it that will not only dial down some of the like consequencing behavior
Mhm.
that is really draining for everyone involved, but also help this kid have the what I talk about as the upstairs brain on,
Mhm.
have that learning brain engaged
Yeah.
and not distracted by like that agitated feeling
Mhm.
that goes with not having a full cup.
Yeah.
Yeah,
J
absolutely.
Jessica, I can tell you really wanna talk about the things teachers can do
I do.
to
I want
you
to help
do,
you
and
so bad.
we're gonna
So
get
bad.
there. We're gonna get there of the practical things, but real quick, we're gonna take just a quick break, but when we come back with Jessica, we will talk about all of these different ideas that you have for how to help, kids in the classroom, students in the classroom who are seeking that additional proprioception input. So listeners, hang out for a minute. We'll be back in a second and we'll give you some of those great tips. Are you ready to level up your education game? Join us at the Innovative Schools Summit, the nation's top K-12 education conference. Connect with internationally recognized thought leaders, educators, and consultants as we dive into game-changing teaching strategies and research-based methods. Each summit features multiple conferences, all in one location, covering topics like at-risk students, innovative teaching strategies, school discipline, and so much more. Create your own learning experience by choosing any of the sessions from any of the conferences. With events in cities like New York, Orlando, Las Vegas, Nashville, and San Antonio, there's always a summit near you. The next Innovative School Summit is in Orlando, March 20th through 23rd, 2025. If you can't make it to Orlando, why don't you check out one of our summer summits in Las Vegas or Nashville at innovativeschoolssummit.com. See you there. Learn from the best in education and earn professional development contact hours through AccuEd.com. AccuEd.com is an online learning platform with over 35 masterclass-style courses giving you more than 75 hours of training on classroom management, leadership, innovative teaching strategies, and student engagement from K-12 thought leaders such as Pedro Noguera, Michelle Borba, Baruti Kafele, Barbara Colaroso, and Michael Bonner. As a special promotion with the Innovative Schools podcast, you can get 10% off your first 6 months of AccuEd when you use promo code PODCAST. Visit AccuEd.com and start learning from the best experts in education today.
Welcome back, everybody, to the second half of this segment of the Innovative Schools podcast. The first section, we've been talking with Jessica Sinarski about this big word, proprioception, kind of just defining what it is and seeing how that seeking that students have of proprioceptive input can be kind of disruptive in the learning environment. Certain things like bumping into others, being really fidgety, climbing or crawling on things are just some key warning signs that educators need to be on the lookout. So Jessica, thank you for joining us in part 2.
Happy to be here.
Jessica, so that list that Liz just shared, I had a kind of question about because it makes me think. A lot of those things sound like things I just did as a young boy. Like I would play rough with others or bump into things on purpose, climb, crawl, whatever, do those kind of things.
Mhm.
So I kind of have like two parts to my question real quick before we get into the practical things that teachers can do is how do you distinguish a kid who is seeking proprioception, additional input in proprioception sensory from typical kid or boy behavior versus and also just between it sounds like things that you might see in someone who has ADD or ADHD or
Sure.
how do you distinguish proprioception sensory input from other things? I don't know, Liz, if you maybe you bumped into things too. I was just hanging out with guys all the time, so I don't know.
Totally careless, man.
Maybe it's not just a boy thing, but anyway, how do you distinguish? That's really the question.
Yeah. It's a good question, and in some ways, I think for a lot of you who might be listening, you don't necessarily have to. So part of why I am passionate about, when in doubt, go prop, is that it really is a tier 1 support. Like almost all students benefit from some kind of movement, stretching, jumping, crashing, like those heavy muscle work, moving their bodies, getting their core involved, like all of those kinds of things are good for brain and body. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions. But in general, those things tend to be helpful. And so when I think about like general kid behavior, or especially like what is often seen as like boy behavior, I think again, I come back to that, the modern world often does not provide what our brains and bodies naturally need. Screens are no friend of the senses. Screens are no friend to certainly to our hidden senses, to that proprioception. And so I think it can be overwhelming sometimes as an educator. Like, okay, I'm supposed to know about SEL and I'm supposed to be able to teach reading the way it's supposed to be taught. And now I'm supposed to know about proprioception, like, and whether it's ADD or not, or what, you don't have to. Like, you don't have to know all of those things. If you're curious, there is a lot of overlap between sensory processing challenges and other like neurodivergent identities. So a lot of kids who have ADHD also really benefit from understanding their senses better and having sensory solutions as part of how they manage their ADHD, like the challenges that come with ADHD. Autism, right? When I was in graduate school, I feel like I never heard about the senses except maybe a little bit related to autism. Well, it's not just autistic people who may be craving more of certain kinds of sensory input or less, right? Or who are really overwhelmed by the school environment. And I think of that for our teachers as well. How many teachers are in sensory overload? So I think your question is a good one as far as, wow, this just sounds like kid stuff, or this sounds like something that a psychologist should take care of, or, I think those are all things that I have heard and that we wrestle with. And so my encouragement is, I have really tried to put together some preventative instruction that is good across the board. And
for all students, not just for one particular group.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure. So then let's get into what you've been itching to get to, which is basically what can a classroom teacher do to help with this? And like you just said, is that these are not just things for an individual kid, but it's things that, because we can all use brain breaks or a little motion or,
Yeah.
whatever to kind of get ourselves back. So I have a list here. Liz and I, we're going to ask you about some of the different ones that you have, because you have a guide. We'll link that in.
I
We'll talk
do.
about that later.
Yeah.
But you have a whole guide to proprioception that's free online. We'll put the
Yep.
link in the show notes. This is a
Perfect.
couple of them, but there's several more than what we'll talk about here. So the first one here, offer flexible seating. How does that help with some of that behavior of the proprioception seeking? Maybe they're being a little bit more disruptive. How does
Sure.
flexible seating help with that?
So for flexible seating, I'm thinking of things like the options to have a standing desk or to lay on the ground,
Mm.
like some kids, a slant desk or lay on the ground, or even having chairs that can rock a little bit, that can give them some motion, or a tea stool, or a exercise ball, right? Some of us do that in adulthood. Like there's sort of a craze for that. Anyway,
Sure. Yeah.
in the
I have a sit stand
classroom,
desk, and I'll just go to standing because I want to. That's what I do.
yes. So you are giving your brain a little bit more or different input when you
Sure.
stand than when you sit. So for example, one of my boys, he having that like resistance band around his chair legs, like that gave him something to push against, so he wasn't kicking the desk or kicking the person next to him, or
Sure.
like
Yeah.
giving that outlet for movement for the kids that need to move can reduce some of the frustrating behavior that comes from a kid that needs to move, right?
Yeah. It makes me think of when I was in school, we didn't have all the options for all the
Sure.
desks and everything, but we would rock back in our chairs.
Exactly.
Right? We'd push back, and
get
then
in
the
trouble,
teachers.
I bet.
Yes, we would.
Yeah.
And the teacher would put the tennis balls on the ends of the chairs, and we'd start slipping and falling, and hoping that we would stop doing that. We didn't. We kept doing it. We probably did it more. But Liz, what's the next one we got here from Jessica?
Yeah, so this one actually sounds kind of like a blast. So it says jump to your spot in line and then stretch up. Jessica,
Yes.
tell me about that.
Yes. So I'm thinking, obviously, in this one, a little bit more on the elementary side of things.
I think high
where-
schoolers would love this too, honestly.
I know. So, okay. Rachel Cullen is an AP high school teacher who is online, and she shared that she had a hopscotch rug in her high school AP English
Wow.
class, and I was like, yes, thank you very much. Like, and the kids, some think it's lame, and some kids use it because it just helps organize the brain. So when you get that little bit of motion and the impact of hitting the ground, that helps your brain and body connect in ways that bring relief and let the thinking brain turn on. So we can do it in silly ways, like jump like a kangaroo to your spot in line. And then the reason I put that instruction of like, and then stretch up high, is that we want to also help kids get out the energy they need to get out, but then get back to that like learning ready state. So sometimes I've seen where teachers are nervous about trying some of these things. Well, if I have my kids jump for 30 seconds, then they're going to like lose all control, and I'll never get the reins back on. And so sometimes we have to sort of co-regulate, like kind of model and give them really clear, fun instructions to get back to calm. Okay, now pretend you're moving your arms through thick honey and get them all the way down to your sides and put them in your pockets, and we're ready to go. Okay.
Yeah.
Shh.
Yeah.
And then we can go out in the hallway instead of, the chaos that it is to try to get kids to line up and walk through the hallway.
Shut your mouth and get in line,
Yeah, I get it, man. It's hard to wrangle my 3 boys, and when we've got 25 of them.
That's got to be tough. Okay, so this one I saw, and it just made me hungry, which was make French fry fingers.
Okay, so if you're listening instead of watching, I'm going to try to describe this. I'm a very
you have to make
visual
sure that you
person.
describe it.
Yeah. So if you fold your hands together and like crisscross your fingers, then you sort of make these little, like, wiggle your fingers. That's your French fries. And so you can then push and pull against your own hand, which gives proprioception. So you have muscles and joints in your hands. And this becomes something to help kids who are bugging everybody around them on the
I'm
carpet.
starting to think, because I would do this just normally without any input, I'm starting to think that I may have been seeking proprioception sensory input. For those listening, just another way to describe this, I've always described this motion as waffling. if you were
Okay.
to waffle your fingers together. I think you did a good description. You're interlocking
Yeah.
your fingers, but just waffle, French fry, whatever food is
Great.
on the menu. But that's great.
So, the last strategy that I kind of would just love to ask you about, Jessica, is the Bubblegum Club.
Okay. Controversial, I know.
I wasn't allowed to
So
have gum like in school
Yeah, neither
ever.
was I.
that is common for gum to not be allowed. And so obviously if there's a school-wide policy or something like that, I'm not saying, break the rules. If this can be something that is done constructively and with intention to have a bubblegum club where gum is used as a tool for focus
Mm,
rather than a toy. And so one of the things that's included in that proprioception guide that we'll link to below is literally a form to make a bubblegum club. And so this was super helpful for two of my boys where they think better when they're chewing on something.
mm.
So for both of them, they went through phases of chewing on their clothes. One of my boys chewed on everything, like literally ate a book at one point when he was
Wow.
like just chewing. We have muscles and joints in our jaws and so that motion can be very regulating. If you think about babies and infancy, right? There's a lot of suckling, and those kinds of things. So having an option like the Bubblegum Club for kids who need that can be really helpful. If that's totally uncomfortable, maybe you stick with something like mints. So I've had a number of
That's a good
particularly
substitute.
math
Yeah,
teachers.
sure.
Yeah. So
Mints you can't really take off and stick underneath the desk, at
exactly.
least not easily.
Exactly. So there are a few teachers I've worked with that okay, I just keep my classroom stocked now. And at times of transition or when concentration is kind of drifting, like out come the mints and we pass them around. And it just gives that little bit of this might sound weird, but organizing input. So it
Yeah,
gives it that little bit of sensory input that helps the
sure.
brain settle so it can do its times table,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, that completely makes sense. And as we said earlier, that's, I think, what we do, 3 or 4 there. There's several more on that document. So make sure to check that out. Something else that you had in that document that I want to talk about, because I really just love the way that you wrote this. But you wrote, it's not us against our students. You and your students are on the same team
Mm.
working to light up the learning brain. One, I just applaud that reminder that it's not,
Mm.
you're not trying to fight with your students, but you're on the same team. You're trying to just build learning and knowledge and confidence and all of these things. There's so many things going on that could be going on in a student's life, that you don't have to look at it as a battle against each other, but you're side by side. So one, just a shout out to that, but also with that in mind, just what I guess what I'm trying to ask is, we've talked about what proprioception is. We've talked about ways to incorporate proprioception input into the classroom. But I mean, what have you seen in the way that incorporating these things actually helps change classroom or learning behavior, or,
Mm.
and that kind of thing? Why should a teacher care? I
Yeah,
guess.
I think that's a really good question because you guys have a million things on your mind. I think it is that it's the learning, right? So when kids' needs are met, they are more able to learn. And it's the same for you as an educator. When your needs are met,
Mm,
it's easier for you to teach. And
yeah.
so I think like uh, another way I've seen this play out is there's a group of pre-K educators that I'm working with right now across a district, and a couple of the classrooms have been have been quicker to try stuff out and then see like, oh my gosh, it helps. So they started getting movement into their roll call. So as their kids were struggling with counting, it was not as automatic for this group as it was for some of their previous pre-K classes. And so they started pairing movement with counting. And so when, we call off who's here, and then we count how many that is, and then we do that many jumps, and then we do that many like
Mm-hmm.
windmills, and we do that
Mm-hmm.
many, claps, and they saw a significant difference in how their morning, not only are they working on academics in that moment, but their morning academic time went better.
Mm-hmm.
Their kids were able to focus more. Another group was able to see like um they started incorporating movement during morning announcements because that was a time their kids got really dysregulated because it's this crackly noise. It often doesn't all apply to them. And so they just got some movement involved during morning announcements. And then they didn't have to they felt like they were starting over after, like they just got their kids settled and then they'd have to start over getting kids settled.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we incorporate Prop, there's more settling that happens. For my son,
Yeah.
he was really struggling in the afternoons. And if he could take a 2-minute jumping break, like there was a mini trampoline in someone's office,
Mm.
2-minute jumping break, and he could get through math without a problem.
Mm.
It's little things. It's not like
Yeah.
you don't have to become an expert in this. It's these little shifts that can make such a big difference. And not just for our littles. So we were kind of joking beforehand.
Yeah. That
Like-
is not right. It's not just for the little kids, but
Yeah.
middle
How
schoolers,
much
high
would
schoolers,
you have
adults.
loved?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So I would love to hear from you if this is you, but I really want to see more punching bags in middle and high school counseling offices or like student support centers or whatever, because they need that.
Yeah.
They need that outlet. And little did we know way back when that's Prop.
Yeah. Yeah, that completely makes sense. I mean, I even see it just in my son who's 4. Because I read through your story. We talked about your story a little bit with your son. My son who's 4, after reading that, I kind of started before bedtime. I used to be very like, okay, we need to calm down. But now I'm like throwing him into the bed, and his bedtime is so much better. I think it just shows how it is, how helpful it is. And it's not just the 4-year-olds. It's, all of us. Hopefully this isn't too far of a jump, and we said that walking and running it's kind of Prop, kind of not. But, just we've talked for adults, like sometimes you just need to get out and walk, or you need to go do something. You need to use your hands. I'm associating that with Prop, like we can benefit as well. So all ages.
All ages. That's exactly right. And I think what you mentioned with your son, with doing some like playful, we used to call them super slams, where we'd like throw him down on the bed, and it's playful and joyful and full of laughter, and then he could be like, like that would settle him for sleep. I think there was something that turned into de-escalation means let's all talk like this and get really, when you're agitated and, what I think of as like having a tiger moment, when that is happening in you, calm is not what you need. You need to discharge the energy. And so giving our students more opportunities to discharge energy. If you have a kid that's acting out, sitting against the wall with their hands in their lap is like the worst thing that can happen for them, because they're not going to build that skill. They're not getting the physical outlet they need, and they're not skill building in the moment. It's So I would much rather see a lot of preventive proprioception and see how that dials down the consequencing that we have to do, or holding accountable that we have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, oh my gosh, this has been incredible. But before we go, I am just curious, for any of our listeners who are maybe wanting to dive a little bit more into this. I hear you have a book that is either coming out or is already out, but we would just love for you to tell us just a little bit more about it.
Absolutely. So Light Up the Learning Brain, it just celebrated its 1-year birthday.
Nice.
So it came out
Happy
last
birthday.
year. And it is available as a book or also as an audiobook, because I know learning on the go is really helpful. And there's lots of visuals to really bring some of the brain science to life and make things user-friendly and ready to bring into counseling or classroom practices.
Yeah, that's great. We'll put links to that book in the show notes if anyone wants to kind of check that out. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a load of fun just talking about proprioception, and thank you for defining it and helping us understand just how it can help learning in the classroom. I think sometimes that we get caught up in thinking about how, it's test scores and learning this and that, and we have all these boxes to check. It sounds like something as easy as hopping to the front of the line or making French fry fingers can help students, be more engaged in class, learn better, so that we can send them out into the world to be great, knowledgeable human beings. Jessica, you also are going to be at the Innovative Schools Summit in Orlando, which is March 20th through 23rd. So for our listeners, just wanted to put that out there. You can go to innovativeschoolsummit.com to sign up for that if you want. Jessica, you also do professional development and that kind of thing. We'll link that as well. So if you want to bring Jessica to your school to talk about proprioception or any of the other subjects in her book, we'll have those links so that you can do that. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please rate, review, and share this. We want to help as many educators as we possibly can, and sharing helps us do that. Education is a necessary, difficult, and challenging endeavor, but it's rewarded with the success of our students. And I just want to encourage everybody with that. We hope you learned something today that you can use in your classroom, either later today, later this week, or whenever you find yourself teaching next. Thank you, Jessica, for joining us. Thank you, Liz, for co-hosting. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, y'all.